I'm going to see if this is going to let me continue because I don't know if it stopped because it needed to have a sensor cleaned or because it's full. So we'll see. But so we were talking about Adam and Eve and the relationship where God was after the fall in chapter 3, where he is punishing them for the seriousness of sin, for falling away from him. And Adam had been placed in charge of everything, and he enjoyed cultivating the earth. He enjoyed taking care of the animals, naming them, and being in charge of what God had created. And Adam was in charge, but he didn't act like it. And so that's why Eve was put under his rule. The ground was cursed, so everything that he tried to produce from it, it would be painful toil for him. In other words, the work wasn't bad, but now it was toil. So work is no longer as good. Now, I'm not saying that we can't do some work and enjoy it, but we do get paid. For the work that we do that's volunteer, that is of the heart of the Lord. And he can use anyone he wants to do that, good or evil. But God purposely made the work that Adam had done to just be awful toil. Now the plants, it will produce thorns and thistles for you, a painful toil that you will eat of it all the days of your life, and until you return to that ground, since from it you were taken, you were dust, and to dust you will return. What a horrible declaration by God of here's your future now. And he loved him, but he had to stay God. He can't just say there's no consequence for sin. When people are like, well, that was a little bit much. You know, if someone raped a child and they didn't even get a year in prison or whatever, you'd say, well, that's not right. That's true, that's not right. There has to be a consequence. But God says that even if you tell a lie, it's the same thing. If you turn against him, it's the same thing. There is no amount of evilness. It's just either it's God's will or it's not. And when you are not in God's will, you're going to have a terrible price to pay for that. That's sin, the effects of sin. So he's trying to make it very clear in this punishment. It's so awful that this will be for all time and that it's a huge consequence. Sin is a very big deal, and we take it too lightly. So he made garments of skin to cover them. Look at there. God killed an animal. These are the animals he created, he loved. There's the first time that blood was spilled to cover sin. Why is that? And people get confused. This is all I have figured. Life is in our blood. That's why when we see somebody get hurt, you know, like if you're in public, you see somebody bleeding, it's like, oh, it's bleeding, because we know life is leaving. Life is leaving. It's a big deal. It's traumatic. Sin equals death. So if you want to get life back, you have to have blood, because that's how God made us. He has life in our blood. That's how he made us. The dust, the rib, the flesh, all of it, the life he breathed into us, the life is contained in our blood. I don't know how it all works, because God's magnificently magical, way above any black magic that we know on this earth that's not good. Not that. He's like a holiness of mystery that we can't know, and he doesn't want us to know. He wants us just to trust and have a relationship with him. So there's your first sacrifice, and it went on from there. So then we go to chapter 4, Cain and Abel. I know this is a lot, y'all, because the other two I'm going to go over too. You know, he basically has Cain, then he has Abel. They're supposed to both give him God offerings. Obviously, Abel kept the flocks. Cain worked the soil. And when God asked for sacrifices, Abel brought fat portions, and Cain brought the fruits of the earth as his offering. We don't really know what was wrong with that. The only thing that we can get from it, because you think, well, God, he didn't have any animals to supply. He only had fruit and veggies. Fruit and veggies was fine with God, apparently. There's something else wrong, and it doesn't say what it is. But we do know that his offering was not up to God's standard, because as you can see, in verse 4, the Lord looked upon favor with Abel and his offering, but on Cain, his offering he did not look on with favor. So Cain became very angry, and his face is downcast. And God's answer here should tell us what this is about. Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? So that implies either what God had asked for specifically he didn't do, or that if this was meant to evoke and make us understand about jealousy, what was holy jealousy and what is mankind's jealousy. This is mankind's jealousy. He says, if you do not sin, then you do what's right, then won't you be accepted? Because sin is always crouching at your door, and it desires to have you, but you must master it. And I think it's the jealousy he's talking about. Here's your test. So now that you've been discouraged, what should you do? Well, if you do what's right and come to me and say, I'm sorry I didn't give the right offering, or I'm sorry I got jealous that you seemed to give him a little more attention to me, whichever thing it was or whatever it was, all he had to do was come to God, but instead he got jealous, and what did he do? We know he killed his brother. And after he did it, the Lord said, so where's your brother? And he says, am I my brother's keeper? Y'all have heard so many people in my life say, I'm not my brother's keeper. That is not what he said. He said, am I my brother's keeper? Because when you say something like, I'm not my brother's keeper, then you're siding with Cain, basically. And the Lord said, what have you done? Unless your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. What? His life? No, his blood. Life is in the blood. That's what I was telling you. Now you're under a curse and driven from the ground, which will open up its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. You'll work the ground and no longer will it yield any crops for you. Just sort of like what happened to Adam, but even worse. This time it won't just be painful toil. You won't have any results. You will be so you won't have any crops to feed or make money or barter or whatever that would have meant in that particular early time frame. You'll be a restless wanderer on the earth. And Cain said, my punishment is too much, more than I can bear today. You're driving me out of the land and will be hidden from your presence. Wait, I didn't mean to do that. It almost sounds like a child, that the innocence and yet the evilness was all like a child. I know you think, evil? Yeah. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Well, okay, so this is interesting because we've only got 4 people on the earth, we think. But we know that there was continuous cultivation of human beings. This is what God said, go and multiply, go and multiply. And this is, people will say, well, that's incest. We think of that as today's incest. Apparently, at that period of time, there was a purity that was allowed. It was good and right to a point, and then God also cuts off in the Bible when that point stops. And so the incest of today is wrong. And some people will say, well, it's just because of the side effects of marrying relatives that you get all these gene things. Well, that's what God would do if he says something's wrong and you do it anyway. So it's like, and I wouldn't say anybody that has any kind of disability or deformity or whatever, that God did that because you did something wrong. We all do something wrong. But there is a genetic problem with that now. And it's because God said up to this point he is populating the earth. That's a different thing. So we won't get into that right now. If you have questions about that, you can certainly research it, or you can write below, and I'll be glad to get you scriptures and things if you want, and we can talk about it on another session. That goes for anything I want to talk about as we go along. And I'm no scholar, but I'm pretty good at researching and using tools, even though they're killing my wrists, they're so heavy. But and also praying that God will give us answers. Sometimes God's not going to, and we have to be okay with not knowing. Okay. The expression, hold on, there's a note down here. It says, well, the wife Cain chose may have been one of his sisters or niece. The human race is still genetically pure, and there was no fear of side effects from marrying relatives at this time. So, the bottom line is, obviously, there was other people, and people are like, well, how would he know about murder? Well, he must have, because he did murder. And he must have known there's other people that if he did it, somebody might do it to him. So now he's worried he's going to get kind of what he deserves. And God says, no, I'm going to put a sign on you, and nobody. They'll put a mark on you, and nobody. It never says what the mark is. There's all kinds of conjecture. Sometimes we go so deep on the things that don't really matter. Who cares what the mark was? But if you want to know, you could. There's all research on that too. It's just like when people say that Jesus, with the woman caught in the act of adultery, and then he was writing in the sand while he waited for them to say who's going to cast the first stone. And people get really into what was he writing in the sand. Some people say maybe it was the sins of the very people that were standing there. I don't know where somebody comes up with that, because it doesn't tell you. We don't know. Same thing that about, when is the exact return of Christ? The Bible tells us we won't know. There's some things God doesn't want us to know. He just wants us to trust and have a relationship with him. Quit trying to know everything. Those kind of things. Knowing him better, doing great. Okay, so then we get more into the story of the ancestry or lineage of Cain as it goes on, and that God does allow another son to be born, Seth. And I thought it was in here what his name means. There's a footnote that says Seth probably means granted, or prayer granted, wish granted, however you want to say it. Not that God's a genie, but that they had asked, Adam lay with his wife in verse 25 again, and she gave birth to a son named Seth. God said, God has granted, no, it's not God saying it. Adam says, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him, and Seth had a son named him Enosh. And at that time, this is the end of chapter 4, men began to call on the name of the Lord. Isn't that an interesting last line? Until we get to chapter 5, we'll talk about it. Anyway, I think that's very, very interesting. Oh, so, now we've got to get to Matthew real quick. So, we get the, we've already been in Matthew 1. We went through the lineage of Jesus and their names, and that's important. A lot of people say, I can't pronounce it. I'll give it your best shot, but read it with your mouth, at least with your eyes. Don't skip over it all. You need to have seen those names before, because these names will come back up in life, and significant things will come of it. And then we see the birth of Jesus, the story of Jesus' birth, and the prophecies that go with it. We saw Isaiah 7:14, where it had previously said that the virgin will be a child and will give